Hello there, good evening. China's economic engine is cracking from the inside. Europe's largest economy is stagnating so badly that its own chancellor just reshuffled his cabinet to survive it. Two different stories on two different continents, but perhaps they're quite the same. Tonight we try to connect them. I'm Mark Summers, and this is In Focus. Welcome to the program, and tonight's episode comes in two parts. We'll spend our first 20 minutes on the significant and generally significant argument published this week in Foreign Affairs by Logan Wright of Rhodium Group that China's decades-long credit-fueled growth model has broken down, that Beijing can no longer generate real growth from its own economy, and that this creates a real, if temporary, strategic opening for the United States and its allies. Then, in our final section, we turn to Germany, where Chancellor Friedrich Merz has just reshuffled his cabinet amid a stagnant economy, a rising far right, and headlines asking whether a surge in business bankruptcies is now actively holding back growth. Merz has spent much of his 15 months in office focused on Ukraine, on rebuilding Germany's defense posture. This week's reshuffle looks like a chancellor waking up to the fact that his own economy may be the more urgent crisis. These two stories are kind of connected. The global industrial map is being redrawn, and whether Germany and Europe more broadly has a place on it may depend on decisions being made in Berlin right now. Joining us is Mehan Nicholas Fursley, who's the director of the EU ASEAN Centre. Good evening, Nick. Where do we find you? Paris. You're in Paris tonight.
Yes, indeed. I'm delighted to join you tonight from the City of Lights.
You're always globe-trotting. We like to find out where you are.
Okay.
Good evening. Okay, let's start with the big picture then, shall we? This Logan Wright piece in Foreign Affairs, the argument that China's growth model, built on enormous amounts of bank credit, has essentially run out of road. What do you make of that? And what does it matter for the global economy?
Well, once again, I'm delighted to join you today from Paris. And there is some truth in what Logan Wright says. There's a small kernel of truth combined with propaganda. So I'm going to try to be neutral, fiercely neutral. And so first, there's in that part of the world, which is Asia, right? Asia, the Middle East, a lot of the traditions used by governments, and you find it in the Arabic language, they are of Roman or Greek origin, right? Because when the Arabs came into the Middle East, they adopted a lot of the Italian, Roman, and Greek bureaucratic and intellectual traditions. One of them is a proverb which goes like this in Arabic and ancient Greek is, the content of a letter by its title. So if you're a minister or the chief of staff of the emir or sultan, sometimes you don't need to open a letter which the Roman emperor or the Byzantine king sends you. The title itself gives you an executive summary of its content. So I'm coming here is, Logan Wright's article is full of big words, China's moment of weakness. Economic decay. So decay is a big word. It means like decadence and decline, right? Like the decline of the Roman Empire. And in the title, he says that it's a strategic opening for Americas. Many big words and many cliches. So I'm going to try here to be neutral and objective. What I'm coming at here, yes, America and China, both of them are encountering at this very moment some macroeconomic, industrial, financial growth pains. So this is the negative side of the coin, right? So if you are pro-American, you will say, look at Beijing's horrible weaknesses. And if you are pro-Chinese or pro-BRICS or whatever, you'll say the opposite, that look at the Americans, they're losers. In reality, it is both true and false, but what I'm coming at, they're both winners. So at this particular stage in our geo-economic, geo-financial, and geopolitical history, both Beijing and Washington are winners, and many of the other countries in the rest of the world are kind of losers. The biggest loser, honestly, being Europe and Britain, right? But to make a long story short, that Logan Wright's essay is very one-sided. He depicts a broad brush picture of China where everything is decline, decay, and collapse. That is widely exaggerated. Now, one thing is right. So where Logan Wright is right, no pun, is about the financial issue. There's a banking sector, financial sector issue with which China is having a hard time dealing. And they, to make a very long story short, they've had that brewing real estate finance issue growing like a cancer at the heart of the Chinese banking system. Yes, it is true. And it's creating, slowly but surely, it's like a slow motion crisis, a lot of aftershocks spreading across the financial sector, which are only partly hampering, diminishing the leeway or the ability of China's SOE and private banking sector to operate. Many of these big banks are state-owned enterprises run like private corporations. And because on their balance sheet, Logan Wright is right, they have huge piles of bad debt or potentially bad credit extended to huge construction and real estate, blah, 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 and infrastructure projects. Yes, it is a problem because it's shrinking the effectiveness of China's banking sector. It's hurting the general,
Okay. China posted its largest ever trade surplus last year, even during this trade war with Washington. But our friend Mr. Wright says that's not a sign of strength. It's a symptom of weak demand at home. Is that correct, do you think?
I think it's 10% correct or 15% correct if you want. And it's really 85% propaganda. It's like always looking at things with a dark lens. And, once again, that journal, that famous and respectable and elite white shoe journal called Foreign Affairs Magazine, it's owned and operated by the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. To make a long story short, it's a wink to you, but who's on the board of the Council of Foreign Relations? It's, to make a long story short, 40% liberal hawks, so pro-NATO Democrats, and 60% neocons, our old friends, the neocons.
Oh, Nick, you big conspiracy theorist, you.
Yeah, so none of them is seeing China for what it is, right? So it's a rival with weaknesses. Yes, they have weaknesses, but they also have strengths, right? It's not black or white, it's gray. And what they're saying, it's all, all bad. No. So the main reason why China is winning that export game, that industrial export, because remember, they're not exporting potatoes or oil and gas, right? They're exporting advanced industrial consumer goods, right? So not the kind of basic, because, the neocon cliche, if you want, was that, and you still have it to a large extent in the mind of policy planners in America. And so that cliche is, it's designed in Cupertino or San Francisco or Santa Clara. So all the big brains supposedly are MIT and Caltech educated designers, engineers. They live in Central California around, Santa Clara, Cupertino, the Silicon Valley. And they are the geniuses who design things. And then the low-paid workers are in Wuhan and Shanghai, and they only manufacture. And so the idea to them in their mind was that China is just another Taiwan, or China is just another Malaysia or India. No, that changed dramatically. Now you have as many, if not more, high-tech, Caltech, MIT grade guys with PhD in programming and nuclear physics and mechanical engineering. Actually, you have more of them by a multiple of 5 or 6 in Shanghai and Beijing than you have in Cupertino, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. This is a real issue. And this is what people like Logan Wright, they refuse to recognize that. So what I'm coming at, yes, part of the surplus, the trade imbalance, the trade surplus, is because domestically, middle-class Chinese consumers are hurt and they cannot spend as much as they used to. So if you are, a Chinese industrialist producing widgets, which can be, smartphones or whatever, cups of tea, you have to sell less of these widgets domestically and sell more of them in Paris, Washington, and Montreal. That is partly true. But you see, it's only 15% of the story. 85% of the story, which Logan Wright misses completely, is R&D investment, is long-term investment in modernizing factories.
And we've talked before about how European manufacturers like Volkswagen and Renault and Fiat, they're struggling at the moment. They're really struggling, and it's partly because of the cheap exports that China has flooding global markets. So what do you make of that? Germany apparently losing around 10,000 jobs this month alone. What do you make of this scenario when it comes to China?
Absolutely. These issues are deeply interconnected. And the jobs lost now in Germany and France are not average jobs. Because you could say, for example, you could say like Logan Wright, all right, in economics we have cycles. There's a slowdown in the industrial sector in France, Italy, and Germany. 10,000 jobs per month for 5 months or 6 months is not the end of the world. But why would it be wrong to say so? Because they're not average jobs. They're jobs precisely in engineering and design and manufacturing, right? So if it's jobs in the hotel industry or in the theater industry or the movie industry or the potatoes, chips industry, it wouldn't be bad, right? But it's high-paying job in the Ruhr, so the Ruhr being West Germany's industrial heartland, where you have a lot of Mittelstand. So Mittelstand, what are they? They are middle plus, middle to large, machine tools, electronics, mechanical engineering, very advanced. The envy of the world for 200 years, right? It's not something to discount. And these middle plus, middle to large industrial companies in the Ruhr Valley, they manufacture the parts, the machine tools, which are used by the likes of Ford or Airbus or Boeing or Rolls-Royce or even Chinese industrial companies. And when you have these companies, the elite of China's, of the elite of Germany's industrial heartland, when you have them laying off thousands of engineers every month, that is very bad. And we have the same happening in France and Italy. That is a slow motion disaster. That is a big problem.
Now, China has used rare earth export controls as some kind of leverage, most recently against Japan. And Mr. Wright there is arguing that that kind of leverage only works when Beijing controls close to 100% of the global supply, and that the rest of the world, when they're closing and getting even a small share of that gap, will sharply reduce China's power. Is he 10% right on that? What do you think?
So I think he's like 99% wrong, and that's interesting or funny. And something funny, because the article, I think, was published 2 days ago.
Okay.
And Logan Wright probably wrote the article 5 or 6 days ago, and it was published, let's say, 36 hours ago in New York. What's fascinating, something happened in the past 24 hours, which completely contradicts in a very funny way. So it's almost a case study, right? But before telling you what happened literally in the past 24 hours, let us look more deeply and coldly at what he says. So he's saying that, in a very neocon way, once again, that there are evil forces, that almost like a conspiracy, like the CCP, right? So he describes, if you read between the lines, it's almost like the yellow peril in right-wing, racist American comic strips in the 1910s, right? So you have a bunch of old Chinamen meeting in secret in a conclave, and they want to rule the world, right? It's not like that. So why is China today? Yes, they cornered, you could say, using an industrial policy term, quite aggressive term, they corner the market. Yes, it is true. But did it happen because of a conspiracy? No. So domestically in China, they have 50 or 60% of the mines, which, if you make the effort of digging and spend billions of dollars in mining engineering for 20 years, you can extract the ores. So that's 50 or 60%, right? And what are the most famous, rare earth minerals? They're called gallium and germanium. Gallium in Latin means France, and germanium means Germany. Why? Because the scientists who discovered gallium and germanium were French and German. And what did they do? They did nothing. After discovering them, did they spend billions of francs or Deutsche Mark or euros improving mining technique? No, they just did nothing. The Chinese took up the German and French physical mining theoretical skills and they deployed it in their own mines, and they improved the refining. The refining and purification process of the rough ores is very complicated, and no one was interested. So it's not a conspiracy. It's just the French and the Germans and the Americans ignored it, neglected it, and it was up to the Chinese and to a lesser extent, the Koreans maybe, to invest a little bit in the technology needed to refine and clean the ores and make them exploitable, right? And they did something else. They said, we are long-term planners. We have 50 or 60% of the world's output, but it's very precious. And with the fifth industrial revolution, renewable energy, electric vehicles, advanced nuclear plants, blah, 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 AI, we will need more of that stuff in the future. Let's not burn our assets. We're going to go to Tanzania and Mauritania and Egypt and Sudan, dig for more rare earth mineral. And when they were doing that, people like Logan Wright were mocking them and were saying, oh, they're idiots, the Chinese. They want to entrap the government of Mozambique and Morocco in a debt trap. And they want to force them to invest money to dig for cobalt or germanium or lithium. And now they're saying, oh my God, they cornered the market. Yes, they cornered the market in Africa too, because the Americans and the Brits and the French were absent. It was not a conspiracy. It was idiocy and lack of long-term industrial planning.
Okay, I'm actually getting fed up of quoting Mr. Wright, Logan Wright, but I'm going to go one more time. His central policy idea is that instead of the West focusing purely on restricting China's access to advanced technology, it should threaten to restrict its own demand for Chinese goods. Because, he says, China depends far more on Western consumers than the West depends on Chinese factories. Now, even to me, as a layman in this area, that sounds like nonsense, but what do you think?
Yeah, this is typical of the sort of right-wing, racist, yellow peril mentality. And what he says may have been true 8, 9, 10 years ago. So back then, the balance of power was not favorable to China. So if the sort of neocon policy thinkers in London, Paris, and Washington, if they had that Logan Wright stance 8, 9 years ago, they could have squeezed the Chinese because the balance of power was not favorable. So when you have that and you squeeze the enemy or the rival, usually the rival yields because the pain is too strong, too hard. But where Logan Wright is wrong is today the balance of power has changed. And how do we know that? We have a real life. So as social scientists or journalists or whatever, we have a beautiful real life case study which happened literally in the past 20 hours. So if you remember 5 days ago, the EU finally, jumping over the hesitations of the Greek and Hungarian and Bulgarian governments, or forcing the hand of the Greeks and the Bulgarians and the Hungarians 5 days ago, they passed the 21st or 22nd, whatever, sanctions package, right, against Russia. And because you have many neocons in Brussels and Paris and Berlin, they said, we're going to do something smart. We're going to use the 22nd, whatever, anti-Russian sanctions package to hurt the Chinese. So they tried to do, to behave, or they imported an idea which the Americans often use when they play that game, which is the indirect jurisdiction weaponization.
Okay.
So they said, okay, there are a bunch of high-tech companies, big high-tech companies in Beijing, indirectly, they supply some gizmos or spare parts to the Russians, and then instead of building, let's say, washing machines, the Russians use the gizmos or the spare parts to build rockets or missiles. So we're going to hurt the Chinese, and they literally agreed, all the European countries, that they would sanction these 14 big state-owned high-tech companies based in Guangdong or Shanghai or Beijing. And that was 5 days ago. And what did the Chinese do literally 20 hours ago on the website of the Chinese Ministry of Trade? They published a list, tit for tat, of 15 big French, German, Dutch, Belgian, Italian industrial companies, saying that if the sanctions on the 15 or 14 Chinese companies are confirmed by Monday morning, from Monday morning 9 a.m. onward, they would stop shipping refined rare earth minerals to Holland, France, and Germany, to these big 15, they named 15, tit for tat, big industrial companies in the EU. What do you think will happen Monday morning? The Europeans will yield because the balance power is not in their hand. It's as simple as that.
But this is the last one on this, and then we'll move on to Germany. But what's his chops, Mr. Wright? He calls for a coordinated response that requires the US, Europe, and the other Asian countries to act together. I mean, why would they want to do that when many people think they've got a madman in the White House who's slapping tariffs on them left, right, and center, and has done again this week? Why would they want to hurt China in favor of the United States when that's happening?
As they say in ancient Greek, the answer is in the question itself. So of course not. And this is why, Logan Wright and the Council of Foreign Relations, they are deluded, and they're missing something important, which was invented by American academics when America had great academics. Many of them, by the way, refugees from Austria and Germany, who were running away from fascism and Nazism because they were Jews, or they were liberal, or they were socialist, and they found back then in the 40s and 50s an amazing environment, an amazing culture environment in America. Sadly, it's not the case today, which was welcoming of these intellectuals. And one of the theories we got thanks to them is called game theory. Game theory is very important. You can use it in military affairs, but you can also use it in corporate strategy and economics and finance. And absolutely, it's a classic case of game theory. Why would, when Trump is every day slapping Europeans and Asians left and right with additional taxes and tariffs, when every week he's insulting even conservative Greek and Italian prime ministers, let alone, center-left or left-wing politicians in Europe, insulting them every week, the same with Indonesia, Malaysia, and India, why would they band together to help America fight China? You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. From a basic 101 first year economics class, game theory, not even advanced modeling, it is very unlikely. What is likely is pivot nations. So there are only 7 or 8 pivot nations. What are they? They are being courted both by China and America. And there are countries precisely like Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. These pivot nations have a great geographic position. So look at the map. Egypt, it has the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, the Pacific, Russia likewise, Brazil likewise, Indonesia likewise. But apart from that strategic geographic position, they have a lot of rare earth minerals and natural gas and gold and diamond and cobalt and germanium. These pivot nations are being courted aggressively, both by China and America. And so what is their interest? Game theory is to remain neutral. If you apply that game theory, if Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Mexico and Russia and Brazil and South Africa and Indonesia, if they remain neutral in that new Cold War, pitting the Chinese dragon and the American eagle, they have a lot to earn, a lot of money to earn, right? If they choose one side against the other, they would have a lot to lose.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to Germany, shall we? Germany in the news quite a bit at the moment with that awful terrorist attack there in Berlin yesterday. But we're going to concentrate on the politics from earlier this week. Chancellor Merz has just reshuffled his cabinet after less than 15 months in office. To be fair, that's how Britain reshuffles their prime ministers after 15 months. But in Germany, this is just a reshuffle of his cabinet. His popularity by most accounts is at rock bottom. The far-right AfD is hoping to win its first state governorship in September's regional elections. Where do you think things stand for Chancellor Merz at the moment? And what does this reshuffle tell us about how things stand?
So here, as much as I would like to say that, being an Anglophile, right? Being an Anglophile, as much as I would love to say that, Britain is unique or England is amazing and beautiful and different, they're all the same. So what's happening in England or Britain today is exactly what's happening in Germany and France. So there isn't much difference. So the reasons why Friedrich Merz is reshuffling is precisely the same reasons why 10 days ago Keir Starmer was kicked out. Precisely the same reasons why today, in most opinion polls in France, Macron and his ilk, in the best, most favorable opinion polls today, they have a 10 or 11, 12% approval rate. Because, one word, which is lack of focus. So people like Trump or Xi Jinping, you may like them, you may not like them. But what do they have in common? Sort of, Trump's brand of bull moose economic nationalism, or Xi Jinping's brand of sort of neo-Maoist, Saint-Simonian, center-left economic nationalism. They have something in common, which is long-term economic planning, which the Brits and the Europeans think is stupid, right? So they no longer believe in long-term economic planning, industrial planning. The Brits and the French and the Germans, they only believe in wave the magic wand, Thatcherite, wave the Reaganite or Thatcherite magic wand of neoliberal economic freedom, and all industrial and financial variables by magic, they would adjust. The Americans like Trump and Chinese policymakers like Xi Jinping have stopped believing in that. And what do they do today in America and China? They focus fiercely on techno-industrial growth. That is the main issue. They want at all costs to grow their tech industrial base because they know that all the rest is connected, finance, military, whatever, social issues, cultural issues. They will go to zero if you don't have a strong a growing industrial, high-tech economic base. So they're banking everything. They're focusing. Trump, if you read his speeches about in the past 16 months, you will note that Iran and Israel are footnotes, but in the news media, we think wrongly that Trump cares a lot about the Middle East or Iran or Israel or the Gulf. No, Trump cares a lot about the Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And for him, all the rest, including Europe, they're just irrelevant footnotes. And it's the same in China. They have beautiful speeches about, humanity, humanism, serving, multilateralism, the BRICS. But in reality, it's not about the BRICS or multilateralism. It's about growing China's industrial, technological power in that global race, that geo-economic race, where you have only two players left, America and China. And the Europeans, including the Brits and the Germans, they don't want to see that reality. So what do? What do people like Starmer or Merz do? They focus on Ukraine and Russia and Siberia, which are completely irrelevant. So how much impact does Siberia or Russia or Ukraine has on Germany's industrial GDP growth?
Okay,
Zero.
we are going to come back. I will come to Ukraine and Russia in more depth in just a moment. Let's just go to the economics for a moment. When Merz took office, he was promising to turn around Europe's largest economy after years of some stagnation there. And now, 15 months later, that turnaround hasn't materialized. The headlines in the newspapers are now asking whether a surge in business bankruptcies is actively holding back the growth? I mean, given everything that we've just been discussing about China's export flood, how much would you say, and I'm guessing your answer from what you were just saying, but how much would you say of this is self-inflicted, this economic pain that Germany is suffering, and how much is coming from outside?
I would say it's 80 or 70% self-inflicted because the top line news is what Trump and China did in the past 16 months, right? So this is the top line news. Trump humiliated the Europeans precisely to the day a year ago. Ursula von der Leyen, who's German, she went to Scotland to a small golf club named after Trump's maternal grandmother, and she yielded to him. And when she went to Scotland a year ago, at the end of July,
she almost literally bent the knee, didn't she?
Yeah, symbolically and literally. And she went there with a blank check from Merz and Macron, telling her, we're sorry, go and yield and submit. So this is the big problem. But this is only 10, 15% of the explanation, that humiliation and these unfair tariffs, blah, blah, blah. The real reason is self-inflicted, once again, because they no longer believe in industrial planning. What is Trump's policy plank? What is Theodore Roosevelt's bull moose capitalism? It means a strong, centralized government working hand in hand with the CEOs of the big industrial companies, using modern protectionism to avoid the likes of Siemens and Mercedes to come and conquer America, right? That's exactly what Trump has been doing for the past 15 months. That's exactly what the Chinese have been doing for the past 20 years. And people like Merz or Starmer or Macron, they think it's dirty. They think the expression industrial planning is evil because they think you just wave the magic wand of free market economics. While they don't change their intellectual software, while they don't start, the starting point for a resurrection of European industry would be to say we were wrong. In that new era, if we want to survive in that race where China and America are becoming stronger and stronger, and we are becoming weaker and weaker, we need to change the model. We need to abandon completely Thatcher and Reagan and start industrial planning. Start having a weekly meeting in Berlin with the CEOs of the 20 largest industrial companies, with me, with the chancellor, and think strategy. Think what is good for the German economic machine, the heartland, the Ruhr Valley, in the next 20 years. But they think that way of operating, that industrial planning mentality, is not good. So what are they doing? They're hoping that Trump in 2 years will fail and that he's just a passing fad. But Trump is not a passing fad.
Okay. And let's get Ukraine in here then, shall we? Because for much of his time in office, Merz has been heavily focused on Ukraine and Russia, but also rebuilding Germany's defense posture within NATO as well because of the inability to rely on the United States. This week's reshuffle to some is looking like a pivot, a recognition that the German economy itself may now be slightly more urgent political threat than what is happening outside. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I hope it's an epiphany. And I hope, and you have the same if you listen. So he's only been in office for 4 days or 5 days with a functioning staffed cabinet. But in the past 4 days, Burnham, he sent similar signals. He said in the past 4 days that he wants to focus on Northern England, on re-industrializing, on the cost of living. All these are domestic issues as opposed to exotic Siberian or Ukrainian issues, right? But I hope it's not too late. I hope it's not too late because that sort of Sino-American, Beijing, Washington, monstrous acceleration of that industrial technological Cold War is putting pressure on Europe and Britain. It's caught in the crossfire, and it may be too late. I hope it's not too late. I think the key would be to be focused on that, only focused on one issue, industrial revival, R&D. And R&D is key. So what's really sad for Germany was the envy of the world when German companies like Siemens or Mercedes or BMW, they would spend 5, 6, 7% of their turnover annually on advanced R&D. And because of Thatcherite neoliberalism and short-termism, because these companies are listed, and the young CEOs of Mercedes and Siemens said, no, okay, R&D is too long-term. I want my bonus. I want my stock options. next year to be very juicy. They cut down. They cut down while South Korea, Taiwan, and China were increasing their engineering budget.
Okay. Well, that's good to have your views as always, Nick. Thank you very, very much. We have Nicolas Versley joining us from Paris tonight. Thank you for being here on the program. So China's slowdown is reshaping global trade in ways that are already hitting German factories, French car makers, and Italian suppliers. And Germany's own political crisis, a chancellor reshuffling his cabinet just to stay afloat, is in part a delayed reaction to exactly that pressure. For years, European leaders spent their political capital on Ukraine and Russia, on defense spending, but this week at least one of them seems to have realized that the ground underneath his own economy needs attention too. Thanks very much for watching tonight. Stay with us because I'll be back in just a few moments with all tonight's main headlines. Have a good night.